Talking to me?
No.
Okay, because I wasn't,
Not even about you.
I wasn't following the conversation, so I thought if I needed a response, I wouldn't know what to respond. Okay. We're down to 24, where last week we had Sarah's death and her burial and the acquiring of the land. It's kind of interesting. Moore's and Fitzgerald's funeral homes. Joe Moore's son Ed has taken over Moore's, and he held a seminar. Had Dr. Thomas Long, who had been one of our Barton Clinton Gordy speakers, and then he's been writing lately some books on funerals and how we're supposed to do them and not supposed to do them, and making a very interesting commentary. But he's teaching at a seminary, and so he was looking for what books to recommend to his students, and had seen that there wasn't any new book on worship and the funeral services, and so he thought he ought to write a new one, bring things up to date. And so as he began his research and his study and so forth, he began to feel that what we do today in our culture has drifted so far away from historic practices and actually our own theology, so that he had to realize that his mind and his thinking and experience had been kind of pulled off track by our culture and those subtle changes over time. And so now he's come back with a pretty radical, and radical meaning go to the root of things, new approach to preach and teach and so forth. So we had a seminar. And on that, it was very much the drifting. What he was saying is so much of the funerals have kind of gotten away from dealing with the body. The body's out of sight, out of mind. It becomes very sanitized, where he didn't go into it at this time, but in the not too distant past, here in our country, the funerals, Christian funerals, would be that the men who are used to working with their hands outdoors would usually go dig the grave. The survivors, the family, the close friends would actually prepare the grave, and somebody would build the coffin, build the box, and then the women often would prepare the body, and it would lay in the parlor. I mean, a lot of homes had parlors and front living rooms that nobody ever uses. You know, you live in the den and in the kitchen and the bedrooms, and that front living room, it just kind of wasted space. Well, a part of that tradition was a parlor where, when there was a death in the family, that's where the body would lie in state. There weren't funeral homes. And if you look down at Stanley's funeral home, there's a picture of their beginning, and Stanley shared a furniture store. And if you stop and think, well, what are caskets made out of? Well, they're made out of wood. What's most living room and bedroom and dining room furniture made out of? Made out of wood. Well, who are the craftsmen that make that? And so the coffins are often made real nice, finished out nice, have little carvings on them and so forth. So that connection between funeral home and furniture store was apparent in that old pictures of Stanley's when they got started in the business. But anyway, the funeral business has taken away a lot of that from the people. I mean, it's a service to try to help take away the burdens and make it easier on people. But so often taking things away, making it easier on people, actually has a reverse effect. And we find this often in funerals where the deceased says, don't do anything. I don't want a funeral. I don't just have a direct cremation. Don't buy a box. Don't do anything. And what that person is thinking, I don't want the family to go to any trouble or any expense on my account. And so if the family honors that to the letter, then they have no way of dealing with their grief. There is no public service where people can come together and to deal with their sense of loss and to honor this loved one. Honor the memory. Celebrate the ways this person touched their lives and has an influence on them, and what of that life you want to cherish and carry into the future. All of that's a part of the grieving process that needs guidance and help and structure to help it happen. And so it's become very sanitized. The other part that he was talking about was so many of the services where non-church people don't trust the clergy person to do the job right, so they have to get a bunch of other people that they invite to do the eulogy and the remembrance for them. And so often the folks who do that aren't church people. They don't know what a funeral service or memorial service is about in terms of our faith. So they use the models of the roast, where you have to tell funny stories and say embarrassing jokes and so forth, which is not the proper setting for a funeral. It may be for the wake or some other setting, but that takes it away. But anyway, in this process, he was reaffirming that we need to, in celebrating a person's life, we tell their faith journey. And their journey from the waters of baptism, and then at the caring for the body, the washing of the body for final disposition and burial, is that kind of anointing, like with Jesus, anointing with oils, that final preparation. And his big part was we journey with the body. A big part of those funeral processions were caring for the body, but journeying with this body, that final representation of the one we loved, that we go with them and care for them up to the last minute. And so I found that kind of affirmed in that he said the old little country churches with a cemetery outside was a part of that when we do that with the remains and are very careful, and then the burial is within the faith, within our understanding of the faith, and it's at the church or by the church, not hidden away. He said a lot of funerals or cemeteries, they got to the idea, we don't want them in town, let's put them outside of town, away from our everyday life, so we don't have to think about that. And so anyway, I felt affirmed in that we're, in his ideas, we're still doing it right, because we've got the columbarium, and the way I do services is that faith journey that I emphasize when I rehearse the story of our loved ones, the saints, when they go before us. Well, that was kind of what Abraham was doing with Sarah, caring for her body and finding a resting place that would be secure. It wouldn't be forgotten. It wouldn't be lost. And it would be the burial place for himself and other patriarchs and their spouses. So, anyway, I found it coincidental that we were dealing with that last week, and then this seminar was this last Thursday night, and very interesting thoughts. But the long and the short of it, felt affirmed that I didn't go someplace and have somebody say all kinds of things that made me feel guilty and ashamed that we're doing it all wrong, but that we are clinging to the tradition and pretty much trying to do things as right as we can. So, anyway, we move on from that. Now, Abraham in the 24th chapter, Abraham was old, well advanced in years. Another translation I read, it said he had reached the ripe old age. Do y'all like that expression, ripe old age? Or is that a negative? It's right on? Oh, I don't know. I always thought it sounded positive. The ripe part. When fruit is ripe, it's the sweetest and the best, So that's a positive, it's also a sense of there is the end. Finis, it's over, the end. And a lot of times we think of end of life that way. It's over. It's the end. No more. However, and that's the one kind of meaning, but then there's the other end that's like teleos, which can be the end like that, but its meaning is more completion, fulfillment. You have reached that point of destiny that you've reached the goal, you've reached the purpose of it all. And the teleos could be the ripe old age. You've gotten to that place where life, in its culmination and its fulfillment, you've gotten there. You've completed all of the tasks. There are no regrets, no unfinished business. It's all complete. And it's good. And you can die in peace with a sense of, I've done my job. I've fulfilled my purpose. I've done what God wanted me to do here on earth. So that would be the ripe old age part. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay. Okay. Now Abraham was old and well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his house, which means somebody mature, who had been with him in a long time, who had charge of all that he had. So he was the head guy, the head servant or slave. And he said, put your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, not from them, among whom I live, but you will go to my country and my kindred and get a wife for my son Isaac. The servant said to him, perhaps the woman may not be willing to follow me to this land. Must I then take your son back to the land from which you came? Abraham said to him, no, see to it that you do not take my son back there. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my birth, and who spoke to me and swore to me, to your offspring I will give this land. he will send his angel before you, and you shall take a wife for my son from there. But if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be free from this oath of mine. Only you must not take my son back there." I mean, this is pretty serious that he's raising that concern. "So the servant put his hand under the thigh of Abraham, his master, and swore to him concerning this matter. Then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and departed, taking all kinds of choice gifts from his master. And he set out and went from Aram Naharaim to the city of Nahor. And he made the camels kneel down outside the city by the well of water." Well, anyway, this distance could have taken a couple of months. It's a long distance, but he loads up the camels, and then the next sentence, he's there. We're glad that we didn't have to read 6 or 7 chapters describing all of his ordeals of getting there. He loaded up, and then he got there. It was toward evening, the time when women go out to draw water. He said, "O Lord, God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show steadfast love to my master Abraham. I am standing here by the spring of water, and the daughters of the townspeople are coming out to draw water. Let the girl to whom I shall say, 'Please offer your jar that I may drink,' and who shall say, 'Drink, and I will water your camels.' Let her be the one whom you have appointed for your servant Isaac. By this I shall know that you have shown steadfast love to my master." Well, before he had finished speaking, there was Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, coming out with her water jar on her shoulder. The girl was very fair to look upon, a virgin whom no man had known. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up. When the servant ran to meet her and said, "Please, let me sip a little water from your jar." "Drink, my lord," she said, and quickly lowered her jar upon her hand and gave him a drink. And when she had finished giving him a drink, she said, "I will draw for your camels also until they have finished drinking." So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran again to the well to draw, and she drew for all his camels. The man gazed at her in silence to learn whether or not the Lord had made his journey successful. When the camels had finished drinking, the man took a gold nose ring weighing a half shekel. A nose ring weighing a half shekel. I'm not sure how heavy that is. Anyway, they didn't explain that. They didn't go into that. There are other issues more important. And 2 bracelets for her arms weighing 10 gold shekels. Seems pretty heavy. And she said, "Tell me whose daughter you are. Is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night?" She said to him, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor." She said, "We have plenty of straw and fodder and a place to spend the night." And the man bowed his head and worshipped the Lord and said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his steadfast love and his faithfulness toward my master. As for me, the Lord has led me on the way to the house of my master's kin." Then the girl ran and told her mother's household about these things. Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban, and Laban ran out to the man to the spring as soon as he had seen the nose ring and the bracelets on his sister's arms. And when he had heard the words of his sister Rebekah, "Thus the man spoke to me," he went to the man, and there he was, standing by the camels at the spring. He said, "Come in, O blessed of the Lord. Why do you stand outside when I have prepared the house and a place for the camels?" So the man came into the house, and Laban unloaded the camels and gave him straw and fodder for the camels and water to wash his feet and the feet of the men who were with him. Then food was set before him to eat. But he said, "I will not eat until I have told my errand." He said, "Speak on." So he said, "I am Abraham's servant. The Lord has greatly blessed my master, and he has become wealthy. He has given him flocks and herds, silver and gold, male and female slaves, camels and donkeys. And Sarah, my master's wife, bore a son to my master when he was old, and has given him all that he has. And my master made me swear, saying, 'You shall not take a wife for my son from among the daughters of the Canaanites in whose land I live, but you shall go to my father's house, to my kindred, and get a wife for my son.' I said to my master, 'Perhaps the woman will not follow me.' But he said to me, 'The Lord before whom I walk will send his angel with you and will make your way successful. You shall get a wife for my son from my kindred, from my father's house, and then you will be free from my oath when you come to my kindred. Even if they will not give her to you, you will be free from my oath.' Well, I came today to the spring and said, 'O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, if you will only make successful the day I am going. I am standing here by the spring of water. Let the young woman who comes out to draw, whom I shall say, please give me a little water from your jar to drink, and who will say to me, drink, and I will draw for your camels also. Let her be the woman whom the Lord has appointed for my master's son.'" This is kind of an interesting line also. He's told the story, and he says, if it happens this way, the idea is God has chosen her. If this happens, God has chosen her. Have any of you gotten the letters from Dr. Biggs in the nominations process asking you to serve on the committee? The way those letters are written, it was almost like the committee, guided by God's Spirit, has chosen you. Have you ever gotten that feeling? So that it's kind of like, you better not say no to God. Well, he's kind of building this. I mean, it's not directly saying that, but the implication is there, and that implication is kind of there now in this story. Before I finished speaking in my heart, there was Rebekah coming out with her jar on her shoulder, and she went down to the spring and drew. I said to her, "Please let me drink." She quickly let down her jar from the shoulder and said, "Drink, and I will also water your camels." So I drank, and she also watered the camels. And then I asked her, "Whose daughter are you?" And she said, "The daughter of Bethuel, Nahor's son, whom Milcah bore to him." So I put the ring on her nose and the bracelets on her arms. And then I bowed my head and worshipped the Lord and blessed the Lord and God of my master Abraham, who had led me by the right way to obtain the daughter of my master's kinsman for his son. Now then, if you will deal loyally and truly with my master, tell me, and if not, tell me, so that I may either to the right hand or to the left. And then Laban and Bethuel answered. Now this is curious. Bethuel is the father, and he should be the first one named, and he should be the one to speak, not Laban. And what the commentators are saying, this whole thing of Laban being so involved, is that Bethuel has probably already died and is not present. But in the story, they wanted him to be there because he had been named, so that we keep the tie connected. But Laban is the active one in the story. So, then Laban and Bethuel answered, "The thing comes from the Lord. We cannot speak to you anything bad or good. Look, Rebekah is before you. Take her and go, and let her be the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has spoken." So they give, or he gives the consent after the kind of exchange of gifts. When Abraham's servant heard their words, he bowed himself to the ground before the Lord, and the servant brought out jewelry of silver and gold and garments and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave to her brother and to her mother costly ornaments. Now we notice again, Bethuel is not given and does not receive gifts. So again, thinking that Bethuel has already died, and now Laban, the brother, is carrying on the negotiations for the bride. Then he and the men who were with him ate and drank, and they spent the night there. And then when they rose in the morning, he said, "Send me back to my master." Her brother and her mother said, "Let the girl remain with us a while, at least 10 days. After that she may go." Now 10, we've got 10 camels, 10 men, 10 days. And they say this is a significant, if it was only 5, that would mean a few. 10 means many. 100 would mean hordes, but it's many. So stories don't say, well, there was 9, or there was 11, or there were 13. It's 5, a few, 10, many, as time has gone on and they don't remember exactly. And then the details of story, he started off with 10, 1 died, they were gone 2 months, one of them was pregnant, and they had twin foals of camels, and so anyway, the numbers are not specific but general. But he said to them, "Do not delay me, since the Lord has made my journey successful. Let me go, that I may go to my master." They said, "We will call the girl and ask her." Now when we ask her, they say this is part of the custom of the Hurrian people in that area, that gifts are exchanged, but the girl gets to have a say. She has to have her consent. And so we'll ask the girl. And they called Rebekah and said to her, "Will you go with this man?" And she said, "I will." So they sent away their sister Rebekah and her nurse, along with Abraham's servant and his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, "May you, our sister, become thousands of myriads. May your offspring gain possession of the gates of their foes." And then Rebekah, and not her nurse, here's another line, and her maids, plural, rose up and mounted camels and followed the man. Thus the servant took Rebekah and went his way. Now Isaac had come from Beer Lahai and was settled in the Negeb. Isaac went out in the evening to walk in the field, and looking up he saw camels coming. And Rebekah looked up and she saw Isaac. Is it going to be love at first sight? The intrigue of the story builds. They see each other. He said, "Ooh, she's not cute," or "Ooh, he's supposed to be tall, dark, and handsome, and he's short and fat." Well, they don't describe him. She was comely to look upon. Anyway, Rebekah looked up and she saw Isaac, and she slipped quickly from the camel and said to the servant, "Who is the man over there walking in the field to meet us?" And the servant said, "It is my master." Now, this is Isaac. And when it says, "It is my master," Abraham is his master. So if Isaac is named master, then this is an indication that it was a deathbed kind of last rites, and orders to the servant, "Go find a wife, because I am long in years and I will not survive. I'm not strong enough to do this. And so you go." Well, he's died in the meantime, and so now Isaac is the master, is what one of the commentators said. So Isaac slipped quickly from the camel and said, "Who's this man?" The servant said, "It is my master." So she took her veil and covered herself, and the servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. So servant and Isaac, now they're all together, they're meeting out there in that field. Then Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent. He took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. That was a long chapter, but it's a long story, and it's... I'll just go on to the next chapter 25. It says, after all of this, now Abraham's already assumed to be dead by the nature of this story, but in chapter 25, Abraham took another wife, whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Joshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. 6 more children. Anyway, another indication that the legendary aspect of the aging and the more miraculous of the late in life birth has stretched out in one part, and particularly the priestly version that has the ages, but some of the other parts of the story still carry the impression that they weren't that old, that they were still younger, but nevertheless, still functional, so to speak. So, lots of things in this story that when we just kind of read through the story, we're waiting for, how's it going to end? And is he going to get there? Is he going to find a wife? And is she going to say yes? And are they going to live happily ever after? And so forth. Well, Nahum Sarna, the Hebrew scholar, tells us that the patriarchal custom of the father initiating marriage transactions was the custom, but we remember a change in that when Hagar was expelled with Ishmael. She got a wife from Egypt. The mother took on that responsibility to find the wife for her son. Didn't leave it up to the kids to find their own. Abraham had control of everybody's money?
At that point, so he was the one who had the money.
Yeah, he had the money.
To buy the wife.
Hagar didn't have any money. She was expelled. So how'd she get a wife from Egypt if she didn't have any money?
Well, maybe that was a different... Well, she had already come to be their servant.
Yeah. Maybe in expelling her, he gave her some money and some goods. Although the story it indicates that they're just kind of kicked out and they almost die.
Surely he gave her something.
Well, we would think so. On the sly. Sarah wouldn't know about it. But anyway, we're not sure how. And he may have found her a poor girl, because they're slaves and they're servants. But anyway, the getting a spouse for the children was very much a parental chore. Anyway, the Isaac, however, Abraham is elderly in this case, and he's not going to live long enough to see that process through. And then I was reading another commentary that said, by this time Isaac is 40. by some of the age reckonings. He's not a young man in his late teens or 20s. He's already 40 if we're following the priestly version dating process or aging dates. Isaac needs a wife for the story to progress of the patriarchs. So in this, he's not simply giving the chief servant the orders, but he's making him swear a solemn vow. This instruction was not simply find a wife, but very specific ones, not a Canaanite wife, but one from the land of his birth. But it's not actually the land of his birth at the Ur of the Chaldeans, but it's in the area of Haran, where they had moved and where his brother had settled but didn't go with him. He took his other brother's son Lot with him when he left. But it's back in the area of Haran where they had decided to stay, but not the actual homeland or birthland. But anyway, the journey would be a couple of months by one scholar's reckoning. So this required to find a wife from among our people instead of among the Canaanites. It can be viewed, if we look at that, as a spiritual, religious positive or a questionable, racist, negative put down of other people. The negative side can be used to argue racial and ethnic, tribal, cultural differences should remain static and in place, and continue attitudes of we are superior to them. And so we have to be careful, because some people will take these Old Testament stories and then use them for their prejudices and bigotry in today's world. If they're carried to an extreme, and when that happens, it goes against what we understand God's will when we get all the way through the Old Testament, because God wanted the Israelite people to be strictly obedient to the way He was leading them, so that He could show His love and grace and let them prosper and do well, and show that everything they did was good and righteous and just, and then be a light to the other nations, but not a source of hostility and warfare and unjust treatment of others, because of the expression, the widow and the orphan and the stranger in the land were the expressions of be kind, take care of, treat justly the most vulnerable, instead of subjugating and making and suppressing those that are different. So anyway, we have to be careful how we pick up on these and not let them turn into attitudes of racial or ethnic superiority, inferiority kinds of judgments, and who's acceptable and not acceptable, and building prejudices and so forth. So, but anyway, on the other side, the spiritual and religious side of that coin, marriage within one's tradition allows a better chance for maintaining the spiritual disciplines of the worship and the customs of the holidays, of the daily prayers. You can teach the children by example and by modeling if you are united in that faith and that tradition, rather than going to different places and modeling different styles and customs, and sometimes different values. I think you may have heard on the news a Muslim doctor, a female doctor, is pregnant, but I read something about she had been raised Orthodox Christian in a a marriage where one parent was Muslim and the other was Christian Orthodox. But now she's being charged in her Muslim country of converting to Christianity, and she's under a death sentence. So when those attitudes get so extreme, they're not healthy, they're not good. But on the positive side, as I said, the faith can be consistent within the home, the cultural values can be consistent in the home, and the children will not be raised confused and conflicted by the parents' radical differences of belief and morality and practices and so forth. So that's the main focus of this at this time when they're just trying to get this started. You can't get it sidetracked at the get-go. God is still working with them, trying to develop. And as we see in the death ritual and in the marriage, there's not a cult or a priestly organization to lead them in some kind of religious ceremonies. They haven't gotten that far yet. There is no ceremony per se about, well, he just takes her in the tent. I think that means they just, here's your wife, how do you do? I'm Isaac, I'm Rebecca, and it's, well, let's go to bed. No wedding, no reception, no cake and party. It's just... So, anyway, it's still early in the development of the religion, and all of those things that we might want to read back into it hadn't developed yet. It wasn't there yet. So, but anyway, the arranging of a marriage, of a wedding and choosing partners was not left up to chance. It was not left up to courtship and falling in and out of love. And since there's the possibility of multiple spouses, see, that's another thing we need to stop and remember. This isn't monogamous marriages. It's still chances of multiple spouses are still a really live option here. Wives and concubines and so forth. The females did not run much of a risk of never having a mate because they could become a part of the concubines group if they didn't find their own husband and become the first and the main wife. But they may have to share the husband or be out in the cold, and if they didn't have something like that, as we understand, a woman without some male, either brother Laban or a part of a harem or something, then the other options, starve to death or become a prostitute, was because of the economic situation. So polygamy was not offensive at that time. But anyway, but after the servant gets Rebekah back home, as I said, there's no ceremony. He just takes Sarah into the tent. But we're reintroduced to the fact that Sarah has died. It says it's into her tent, which seems kind of strange, and nobody really talked about that. Why is he in her tent? Don't know. It doesn't, I'm sure there's some kind of logical reason, but the scholars didn't explain it. But I'll study up more this week, and maybe I'll find somebody who deals with that. But he's grieving. And one of the things that really Isaac is a very passive character here. We don't have a bunch of dialogue from Isaac. We don't have a bunch of things that he's doing. Abraham's in charge, and then he commissions a servant to go. But then Isaac, he's just kind of out there walking around in the field. And we don't know whether he's deep in reflection and in prayer and communing with God, or if he's just grieving. He's sad because his mama died. and we don't know how many years that might be, or if he's spoiled. He just doesn't have anything to do. He doesn't have a job. Daddy's provided everything for him. He doesn't have anything to do. He just wandering around, walking around out there in the field. If they had a can, he might have been kicking a tin can along. Just tung, tung. We don't know. Yeah, of course. We don't know what he's doing out there. It could be something positive, or it just could be that he's got nothing else to do. But anyway, it all raises lots of questions. But and even as the story goes along, Rebecca has to bear the next generation, and then there's lots of stories about them, but not very much about Isaac. Isaac is just not a very colorful figure in the story. But anyway, this oath business, putting the hand beneath the thigh, seems quite curious and strange. Anybody do that kind of oath today? No, I don't. Not in our country. Well, basically, underneath the thigh is a euphemism for touching the private parts, the genitals. And in one sense, this means this is a very personal request, a very personal, intimate request and oath. Now, you can cross your heart and hope to die and swear on a stack of something or others, but this connection between these two separate persons requires some gesture to indicate just how close a personal bond this is and a trusting relationship in order to make this promise. So the other significance that Sarna, the Hebrew scholar, mentions about this euphemism and this expression of the male genitalia understood as the fountain of life, and thus this oath has to do with that continuation of the family line. It's talking about procreation. It's dealing with sexuality. He's supposed to go find a wife, and so there will be children, progeny. So from Abraham through Isaac into the future to build a great nation. So this is very serious business, and it has sacred significance because it has to do with God's promise of multiple generations of children to continue to follow. Let's see. I need to check. My watch slowed down the other day, and maybe it's slowing down again. Nope, it hadn't. I thought maybe it was. Anyway, so the reproductive organs, the seat of procreative powers, has sacred significance, and therefore it's connected to this sacred oath. Secondly, this is seen as a last testamentary event. The last wishes also carry extra heavy intent and responsibility. It also has to do with the inheritance. Who's going to inherit all of this wealth? It's left to posterity. Well, there's got to be a posterity to leave it to. Again, relates to offspring, heirs, procreation, and so forth. So he makes the oath both to find a wife, but also promising not to take Isaac out of Canaan. Never take Isaac out of the promised land. If a wife won't come to you back to Canaan and Isaac, then you will be released from this oath. But keep the second part. Never take Isaac out of Canaan to acquire a wife. So the danger or risk here, it looks like, is that if he gets taken back and is kind of repatriated to the family, he may not be able to get loose. They'll hold on to him. Now, I immediately thought of Ada, Oklahoma, where I served before I came here. Ada is a big enough place where there's lots of work and professional. It's kind of a professional center. But so many of the leading families, they send the kids off to college, and they're gone a while, but then they come home and become a part of the family business or something else. There is this strong draw for folks to come back. Go away for a while, but they come back. And so I think this story is saying, knows how strong that draw of family and kinfolk can be to hold you someplace. And so it says, don't let him go back, or he will be held there and he won't be in the promised land that God has promised. Even though it's God's will, God's intent, we don't want that happening. So don't do that. Don't let that happen. So we do that. Well, that's enough to kind of end on for today, and there's a whole bunch more. Gosh, I thought I got 2 more pages just today, and I didn't even think I had enough. But anyway, so any questions about all of that right now? Well, it looks like everybody's getting ready for Senior Sunday, so let's have a prayer, and then I will get out of your way and let you go get a drink of water or take a nap before service starts. Let us pray. Well, dear God, we thank you for all the ways that you bless us, but so much of who we are and how we deal with life comes to us through our faith heritage, and so it's good to rehearse and remember the faith heritage through Abraham and Isaac, and we find interesting tales and stories